I need 5 volunteers. So be thinking about that. All right, come on up. Come on up, Evan. I know you've always wanted to do this. Come on up, Craig. Come on up, James. Need one more. Come on up, Mina. Love it. Okay, you guys come on up here. So from the time I could remember, come on up on the stage with me. From the time I can remember, I have these fond memories. You guys could just stand back there for a little bit. I have these fond memories of Christmas. And the Christmas isn't necessarily about gifts. I don't remember maybe 1 but 2 gifts I've ever received in my lifetime at Christmas. But I do remember the activities, and I do remember the events that surrounded Christmas. And one of the family activities that we just fell in love with was charades. How many charaders do we have here in the audience? All right, not very many. So basically what happens with charades is I'm going to give them something they have to act out, and they're going to be acting it out. And they're all going to do it together at the same time. And you guys in the audience, I'd like you, and if you're watching online at home, grab a pencil or a piece of pen or a paper and a pen and be writing down what you think the 5 are. And when you think you have all 5 gifts, you just stand up, all right? That's what I wanted, and that's what we're going to do. So, really, that's what you volunteered for. Charades. And this is something that you guys could do at home, on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and just kind of have fun as a family, all right? So I'm going to give you get the first one, okay? Don't say it out loud. You cannot use your words. You have to use your actions. You understand the rules? C, all right.
Oh, jeez. Are you... Really?
Yeah, that's going to be perfect for you. I like that one. Oh, this is going to be good for you, too. I didn't plan this out. I didn't.
We forgive you. Oh.
Oh, all right. So, is everyone ready? All right. Now, wait. So, you guys are all going to be doing it at the same time. You cannot use each other. Okay? You can't use props. I know that's what you're thinking. Okay? You can't use props. No, you got to do this. All right, here we go. Okay, so we're going to go my left, or no, your right to left is what you're going to do, okay? So Russell's number 1, James is number 5. Is everyone ready? Are we ready to play the game? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A little music, go. I'm waiting for people to stand up if you got them figured out. No takers yet? Gary Cox. All right. What's Russell? Wise men. Very good. Okay. All right, Craig. What's Craig? The Grinch who stole Christmas. Well done. Well done. Well done. Kind of fits. Kind of appropriate.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. What's Mina? Partridge in a pear tree. No? Anyone else any guesses on her? A chicken? A turkey is right. A turkey. Okay? Okay? Evan? Little drummer boy. Yeah, he's mistletoeing it. Guys, give them a round of applause. Good job. If you're coming in on our series this Christmas holiday and you're wondering what are we talking about, we started a series last week called Unwrapping Christmas, and what we're specifically targeting is we're going to look at different characters through the Christmas narrative, because I think what we find is that as we explore these characters, we're going to see ourselves in these individuals. And last week we started with the father of the narrative, so to speak, with Joseph. And what we found with Joseph was that he really kind of encountered this point where he was thrust into this story, and he didn't quite understand how to make heads or tails of this narrative at all. Can you imagine being Joseph and being told the woman that you love, the woman that you're getting ready to go knock on the door and collect and say, hey, let's set up our home together. All of a sudden, she's pregnant. And he was having a hard time understanding what his dreams meant. They didn't make any sense to him. And what we found was that when you're having a hard time in this Christmas holiday or this Christmas season, looking at your dreams and wondering what do they mean and what do they make sense, and you could substitute the word dream for your situation, your circumstance, your life. When you look at your life and you're wondering what's going on, one of the things to remind ourselves of is that you can really lean in and lean against Joseph, because in his life, there's a strong chance when you don't understand the story, there's a strong chance that you're a part of it. And that's what we found with Joseph, is he never really saw how the story ended. He didn't see who this Jesus, this Messiah, this Emmanuel would become. He just saw him as the boy. And Joseph dies in the storyline before Jesus even arrives in ministry. And so if you're having a hard time in your own life, maybe there's a strong chance that God's doing something with your storyline, that you don't necessarily have to see how the story ends to be a part of that story, that you can have great confidence knowing that God might be telling a story through your life, and it's okay that you don't know how it ends. But someone's always watching. And we know that as you walk into this Christmas holiday, man, it's full of tension. It's full of emotion. Some of you, you're really anticipating getting together with your extended family because you haven't seen them in a while, and others of you are dreading going to the holiday season with the in-laws. And some of you don't have a choice because your in-laws come to you, and you're just like, why can't I escape? I identify with you completely. I do. Some of us, it's filled with desire, and some of us, our season's filled with drama. We're filled with unrealistic expectations, or maybe it's full of surprises. But whatever this Christmas holiday brings to you, we want to try to unwrap it and help bring some hope in where the next step might be. Because we really, truly believe that God designed you and created you for a specific purpose, and He's trying to get the world's attention through you. In some ways, He might be using the world to get your attention. So today, we're going to take a closer look at an older couple in the narrative, one that you're very familiar with. You've heard the story 1,000 times from the time you were knee-high to grasshoppers. And if you've never seen the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah, then it might be brand new. But even if you've heard this story 100 times before, I think that there's going to be some new hope and some new things that might surprise you that you didn't understand fully of this story, simply because we haven't taken time to really dive in. But what I see with Zechariah and Elizabeth, their storyline is really, it's not about when your dreams don't make sense as much as what happens when you've given up on your dreams. So tell me what you know about Zechariah and Elizabeth. Let's just kind of go right from the get-go, shooting from the hip, no open book test here, no open book quiz. What do you know of Zechariah and Elizabeth? Someone. They're old. Okay, what does that mean in Scripture? Yeah, Bill. He was mute eventually. He was playing that charade game, right, that we just saw. Now you're starting to see the connection between charades and where we're going, perhaps, is because Zechariah receives this temple, and all of a sudden he has to start making hand gestures to communicate. What else do you know? One more time, what? No children. They're barren. They're barren. Okay? So let's turn your Bibles open to Luke chapter 1. We're just going to dive right in here. Luke chapter 1. We're going to look at verse 5. So what happens in Luke's narrative is Luke writes an orderly account for a guy by the name of Josephus. He says, many have undertaken to write the things that have happened about our day. And so in Luke chapter 1, he starts right away from saying, I know there are a lot of reports about who this Jesus guy is, but I wanted to take an orderly account, a chronological account. I wanted to really investigate the eyewitnesses, get to know the storylines, and really understand if this thing's true. And so I've decided to write this orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. And it's kind of a volume 1, volume 2 feel when you're looking at the Gospel of Luke, because the Gospel of Luke ends on this huge cliffhanger with Jesus' resurrection. And in Acts, he continues the storyline. He says, now here's what happened after Jesus was resurrected and he ascends into heaven. So in Luke chapter 1, we understand what's happening, and he is the only one that goes all the way back to the very beginning. He's the only one that really gives us the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth from an early age. Luke's also the only one to really lean against that humanity aspect of who Jesus is. We learn about Jesus' adolescence at 12 years old because of Luke's narrative. So Luke's very special. It's very unique in what it does. So in Luke chapter 1, 1 through 5, we get a little bit of the why he's writing it. But in verse 5, he starts in with, in the time of Herod, king of Judea. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest, and his name was Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. Well, that's great. I wonder who that guy is. His wife, Elizabeth, was also of the descendant of Aaron. Both of them were upright in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commandments and regulations blamelessly. And then Luke says this, but they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well along in years. You see, what's happening is Luke's painting this picture of darkness for this young couple, or for this older couple. And not just this older couple, but also just this culture that they were living in. You see, I think their personal experience was a result of their cultural expression of the darkness that the culture was casting into their personal life. Culturally, this was a very dark time for Israel, because Israel was set aside. And you guys know this from reading your Bibles, because you're great Bible students, and you understand even the story of the Old Testament and the culmination of the events that were supposed to lead up to this event. Israel eagerly anticipated the arrival of the Messiah, because God had promised them years ago, we're talking 1,500 years ago, that he would do something amazing with their nation, that someone would come from their nation and they would be a blessing to the world. And so Israel was holding on in hopes and in dreams and ambitions that God was going to fulfill his promise, that God was going to remember his covenant. But for 400 years, they had just come out of exile from the Persian Empire. They were allowed to go back to Israel. They were allowed to reset up their temple and their city. And it was just a glimpse or just a glimmer of the height that it used to be. And so for 400 years, God has not said a word to their nation. But they keep doing the routine. They keep going through the mundane. They continue to remain faithful. Yet there's this darkness that covers their culture. And Zechariah and Elizabeth are an expression of that darkness. They fall into the shadow of that. And here's this king by the name of Herod, king of Judea, otherwise known as Herod the Great. Now, when you read through Scripture and you read through the New Testament, there's a lot of Herods that kind of come up. And this guy's family continues through the whole narrative for about 30 or 40 years. So he gets a little confused, or we get a little confused when we see who this Herod is. We really kind of have to lean into who is this guy and really dissect it and open it up a little bit more. When we start to dissect who Herod the Great is, we learn some remarkable things. We learn that Caesar Augustus once said, it's better to be this guy's swine than it is his son. We learn that Herod the Great has 10 wives. A couple of them he's executed because he was paranoid that someone was going to try to take his kingdom away from him. He had aligned himself with Cleopatra before Caesar Augustus becomes an emperor. There's a lot of historical things happening with Herod the Great. But Herod the Great was not that great. In fact, we learn later in Luke chapter 2 that he issues a decree to wipe out all of the children, all of the boys 2 years and younger. This guy was morbid. Not only that, but he would have all kinds of sexual escapades in his palace. He was he was nasty. He was dirty. He was not a good guy. It was better to be his swine or one of his pigs than it would be his boys. And so in this obscure hill country, which we learn later in verse 39, lives this aging couple, and something was tragically wrong in their life. In Exodus chapter 23, verse 26, God had made a promise to the Israelite people that if they followed him, that he would promise that no one in their nation would ever be barren. No one in their nation would ever be childless. Exodus 23, verse 26. And later he reinstitutes or reaffirms that promise in Deuteronomy chapter 14, and he actually extends it, and he says, not only will you not have to worry about being childless, but your offspring of your cattle, of your sheep, of your goats, nothing that you touch will be empty. And so for Elizabeth and for Zechariah, they felt like that something was off, something was wrong in their own personal life, and God was bringing a judgment of condemnation because they had done something wrong. This is a big deal. They are feeling the darkness of the day. And as they age, they watch their dream disappear into the horizon. And I don't know if you've ever been there or not, where the older you get, you start to figure out, or you start to wonder, is this really what life was meant to be? And you wonder about those dreams that you used to have when you were younger, all the ambitions of what you could be and what you should be and what you want to be. And eventually you wake up one day and you're not where you thought you would be. See, I love the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth because it gives a guy like me hope. Because I didn't think that my life would work out the way that it did. There are a lot of dreams that I've given up on. There are a lot of things that I've thought I would be very different in. And yet, God reminds me through the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth some key things to hold on to as I continue to live my life. And I hope some of these will be helps to you. See, they had given up on their dreams. They had given up on the idea that one day they would have laughter in their home, that they would have life in their home, that they would have love in their home, that they would have children that they could pass their faith on to. But I think sometimes God waits for us to give up on our dreams so that we might reach out to him in those moments. Because that's when you're really ready to reach out to him. Verse 8. Once, when Zechariah's division was on duty, and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and to burn incense. And when he was there for the time burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appears to him, standing at the right side of the altar of the incense. And when Zechariah saw him, he was startled and he was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayers have been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to give him the name John. He will be a joy and a delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from inside his mother's womb. Many of the people of Israel will he bring back to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteousness, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Can you see this? So Zechariah has this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So according to a historian, a Jewish historian by the name of Josephus, we know that in this day there were approximately, catch this, 21,000 priests in Israel's day. And they were divided into 24 different divisions. From the time of David, that goes all the way back. And even after captivity, those 24 divisions remained. And so here's this remote guy in a hill country, kind of minding his own business, giving up on life, giving up on his dreams, living in this dark area, wondering what his life is really supposed to mean anyway. And he finally gets the dinner bell to ring. He gets excited about, wow, I've been chosen to go inside the temple. Now, we have to do a little homework, and we have to understand a little bit about what the temple is. So they had the courtyard, and anyone could, like the females, could come into the courtyard. But when you went into the temple, this was reserved for the priests. And as you walked into this temple area, there were the candelabra, and you had the showbread, but right in front of the Holy of Holies, the place that represented God's presence in all of Israel, where God camped, where God lived, was this burning incense altar. And you had to be just one high priest once a year that was ever able to enter the Holy of Holies. But it was a once-in-a-lifetime selection to even go into the temple to begin with. And not only was Zechariah chosen to go into the temple, but now he's chosen to go burn incense before the Lord, which represented the prayers that went up with all of Israel. In Psalm 124, it talks about how, Lord, I pray that you would hear my call, that you would listen to my voice. My prayers are like incense that floats to you. My hands are like that of the evening sacrificing raising. And so David would pray these prayers. The Israelites would pray these prayers about, God, hear my prayer, listen to my prayer. And this incense was a physical representation of all of the prayers of Israel going up. And Zechariah has the honor and the obligation and even the burden to cast the incense, to make sure that all of those who were outside would see that their prayers were actually hitting the throne. And if you're one of 9,000 people to be selected to go into the temple, into the holy place, and to burn incense, this is a huge deal. You would be lucky if once in your lifetime to ever be selected. And this was his one time. And he was an aging man. What I see with this is, it's even when you've given up on your dreams, it's important that we continue to keep serving and living. We keep serving and doing life, especially when we stop dreaming. Just because we've stopped dreaming, it doesn't give us an excuse to stop serving at all. Your dreams may never come true. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago in Daniel, in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they shared with Nebuchadnezzar, even if our God doesn't show up, I will not compromise my position. I will not compromise where I am with God. Even if God chooses not to accomplish my dream or chooses not to give me the dream of my life, I will remain faithful to him. See, God is not some genie in a lamp that we get to rub. Too many people have ended up leaving the temple way too early in their life. They've left the presence of God, and they've sold themselves short of what could happen in their life because they give up too early. When they've given up on their dreams, a lot of times I see people giving up on their life. They've given up on continuing to remain faithful. They leave before they find their closest moments with God in the temple. And God is asking you, and he's begging you, and he's waiting for you just to finally give up so that he might show up in your life. But if you sell yourself short of opportunities to continue to remain faithful, God can't speak to you. So, question for all of us is, where have we gone? Have we given up on life? Have we given up on serving? Is it just way too much work? You know, I tried, God. I showed up. I waited for you. Only to find that you've left early in disappointment. Let's look at verse 18. Zechariah says to the angel, how can this be? How can I be sure of this? I'm an old man, and I love this next phrase. Look at what he says next. And you haven't even seen my wife. I love that he says that. Now, here's as I observe verse 18, there's a couple of things that I have to really kind of think about. If you look at it, Zechariah sees this angel. The angel says, hey, your prayers have been heard. You're going to have a son. I don't know if he heard the rest of it or not. I'm sure he did. But he was still stuck on the fact that, hey, all of a sudden, we're going to get pregnant. And the first thing out of his mouth is, how can I be sure of this? And then he points to his wife. He tells Gabriel, he's like, have you seen her? Do you know how old she is? Her childbearing days are really over, and that was the last thing he says. You ever seen that before in Scripture? I just thought that was hilarious when I discovered this. I came home, and I just couldn't wait to tell my wife. It's like, Zechariah, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Why did you say that about her? But then as soon as he says that, here's the other piece. It's one thing to have this kind of transparent, intimate time with God or an angel and say, I just don't know how that's going to work. I mean, I know I'm pretty old and I know she's pretty old. But then after he can't say anything, and after he has to go through the whole charade of life for 9 months, 10 months, then he has to go back home. And after he's finally able to say something, at some point in his life, he told Elizabeth what he told the angel. And the only reason I say that is because Luke was able to carefully investigate the eyewitnesses, and I could imagine John the Baptist sitting around with his boys, with his posse. They were having a campfire one night. He's like, yeah, my dad, I'll tell you what, he could have got away with something, but he chose to open his mouth afterward, and he told Mom all about it, and we haven't heard the end of it since. They were able to pass this on through, and I just find that the humanity of this text so intriguing for me and so hopeful for me, because I can find that God will use us even in our weaknesses. God, I think, laughs at that sort of stuff. But then if you stop and you analyze what's happening, not only does he say kind of a buffoon thing to say about his wife, but now I think what he's really asking the angel, I think what he's really saying, he's not looking for a health class refresher from junior high. He's not trying to understand the science of it. That's not what he's trying to do. What he's trying to understand is how he's supposed to communicate it to Mama back home. Can you imagine being that old and an angel shows up and says, hey, Zechariah, God's heard your prayer. You're going to have a child. And he's not asking for a science lesson. He's not asking for a health lesson. He's trying to figure out how to communicate that back to his wife. How am I supposed to sell this one? And his job just got a lot harder because now he can't use his words. Imagine trying to do that charade back home when you get back to the tent. Some of you are starting to figure out what I'm saying. This is an impressive thing. And so them being older, he's trying to say, no, God, us baby, you baby. No, that's not happening, Bubba. That's not going to work. But yet God shows up in this thing. And my encouragement here that I started to glean was, I'm going to let God worry about the science, and I'm going to focus on the compliance. I'm not going to try to figure out how it works. I'm not going to try to figure out why the electricity works or how the electricity works from when I flip the switch to the light coming on. All I'm going to do is remain faithful to the fact that when God said to do something, just to do it. So I'm going to let God figure out the science, and I'm going to worry about the compliance. I'm just going to be faithful to what God's leading me to do. And I know that God's leading you to do some impossible things right now. You feel it, you know it, you think it, you believe it, and you don't understand how it's supposed to work out. How am I supposed to manage? How am I supposed to do this? Be careful with your questions. Worry about the compliance. Let's keep reading verse 19. Then the angel says, and this is a side sermon. This is one that we could camp out on all day long and do a completely different sermon if we wanted to. But verse 19 is significant. The angel says, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I have been sent to speak to you, and I tell you this good news. I've circled those 3 separate lines in my Bible. I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I have been sent to you to preach this good news. All right, so here's some questions that I asked when I read this verse about myself. Where am I standing? Where am I spending my time? Am I spending my time with God, or am I spending my time with others? Am I spending my time with God, or am I spending my time with the world? Am I spending my time with God, or am I spending my time listening to other voices? Another couple of questions I've asked is, who is God sending me to? Because I know God sends people, but who is he sending me to? There are people that God has sent, that he's wanting you specifically to go to yourself, because no one else can reach them. But who is God sending you to? And then the third and final question I have is, what are you talking about? What fills your conversations? The good news? The gospel, the story about Jesus coming into the world and redeeming man of sin and destroying death, is that what fills our conversation? Or is it about football, or is it about baseball, or is it about sports, or is it about hunting or fishing? What fills our conversations? What are we talking about? Verse 20. And now I tell you, you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their proper time. So meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah, and they were wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. Imagine, you're the crowd, and you're wondering what's taken the priest so long, because you're waiting for the incense to go up, which is a signal for you that that you can pray. Because when you see that incense, you start talking, God starts listening. That's how this works. But there was no incense for a long time. Finally, there's incense, and then he comes out. When he comes out, he could not speak to them. Now, here's what that means. We read through that, and we don't quite understand what's happening. You know why they're sitting out there? They're sitting out there because they're waiting for the priest to come out with the blessing. They're waiting for the priest to say, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face to you and give you peace. That's what the priestly blessing is. That's happened since day one, Numbers 6, 24 through 26. And they're waiting for the priest to come out and say, may the Lord bless you and the Lord keep you and make his face shine on you. Be gracious to you. May he turn his face to you and give you peace. And you can't do anything through the rest of the day until you hear that blessing. But now a priest walks out, and he can't say anything. You know, something's wrong when the preacher shuts up. And that's what happens here. Zechariah can't speak. He can't communicate. God took it. Because Zechariah doubted that he was ever going to do anything in his life anyway. He'd given up on his dreams. Look at Elizabeth's reaction. After this, verse 24, somehow Zechariah is able to communicate to Elizabeth without his words about what's supposed to happen. She becomes pregnant, and for 5 months she stays at home. Verse 25, and then she says this, the Lord, look at her words here. This is important, church. The Lord has done this for me, not to me, not because of me. He's done this for me. Church, I know many of you, you wonder where God is, and you're waiting for him to show up. Please hear me when I say, the Lord that I know, the Lord that I read about, the Lord that I study is a Lord that is for you. He is for you. He wants you to experience life and life to the fullest. But he's waiting on you to give up your dream so that you can start living it. Otherwise, if you start chasing your dream, you'll stop chasing him. God's waiting on you to give up on your dream so that you might be one step closer to living your dream. This isn't just some Bible study for me, guys. And that's what's important about what I'm about to say. This isn't just some, oh, that was creative, and that's a cool way to say it. This is my life. And for those of you who know me well, you know what I'm talking about. Because I grew up on a farm, and I grew up on a farm that my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather homesteaded. I'm the only one in my family to ever leave. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I often say I think God kind of tricked me into leaving because he knew I wouldn't. But the older I get, I have this dream of being closer to family. From the time we were young, Andy can testify to this, from the time we were young, I wanted to be surrounded by family. Because I grew up every Saturday and Sunday playing cards with Grandma and Grandpa, going over to one side or the other. And both sets were 1.5 miles away from each other. And so my whole dream in life has been one day to Finally get closer. Finally be there. Another dream that I had was that when we started ministry, when I realized that God was doing something in my life, and I just had to kind of take a hold of his hand and follow him wherever I went. He led me to Illinois, and then he led me to Minnesota. And I always remember thinking when I was younger, man, it'd be really ideal to be set up in Des Moines. Because if I were set up in Des Moines, then we would be split between her family and my family. How ideal would that be for holidays and Thanksgivings and Christmases? Just get-togethers. Because we couldn't do any of that before. And the other interesting thing for me was Des Moines, as I analyzed it, was kind of this hybrid of culture. And many of you understand what I'm talking about, right? We can look back to the west and we see skyscrapers in our yard. We could look back to the east and we can see cornfields. And I'm a cornfield guy and my wife is a skyscraper gal. We're learning the significance and strength of each culture now. We have over the last 20 years. And it wasn't until I was ready to give up on ministry, it wasn't until I was ready to be done with this calling, that God said, now it's time. Now it's time to live the dream that you want. Des Moines was the farthest thing in my head when I thought about coming here. I was ready to be done. I've told that story before. And all of a sudden, God started to bring a church by the name of Rising Sun and Steve Rowland together for something great. Because I'd finally let go of the dream that I wanted to live. And he had far better expectations, far better dreams and capabilities than I ever had. I was limited in my pursuits. So it wasn't until about a year or so after we moved here that my daughter gave this to me. And I don't know why she gave it to me, but I never really had seen the context. But the context is in this passage, this story that we're reading. It's about Zechariah and Elizabeth. And finally, when John is born, Zechariah is able to open his mouth and he starts to talk. And it's found in Zechariah's song, and I want to read it to you. It's in verse 67. This is a long chapter. Verse 67, his father Zechariah, 9 months later, was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, because they're wondering about what name to give him. He says, no, the angel said to name him John. Verse 68, he says, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and has redeemed his people. He has raised a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. And he said through his holy prophets a long time ago that salvation from our enemies and from the hands of everyone who hates us, to show mercy to our fathers, to remember that covenant, remember the dark time that they're living in, the oath that he swore to our father Abraham to rescue us from the hand of his enemies, to enable us to serve him without fear and holiness and righteousness before our days. And then he says in verse 76, and you, my child, Zechariah is speaking to his son. Talk about the dreams and hopes and ambitions that a father has for his boy. This isn't just some ordinary boy. They're not going to have just some ordinary family anymore. This isn't just some run-of-the-mill kid. This is an exceptional kid. This is an extraordinary kid. God blows his expectations out of the water, and he says this in 76. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High. For you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. And here it is. Because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet in the path of peace. So Gracie hands me this note, shortly after we moved, and she says on the back, this should be the church's motto verse. I love it. To Dad from Grace, your daughter. Imagine if Rising Sun brought hope for people who were in darkness, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet in the path of peace. So ever since Gracie's handed me that note, it's been put on my prayer board right next to my desk. I didn't really even understand the context of it until now. But I know some of you have given up on your dream and you're just waiting and you're hoping that you're just holding out that God would show up. Don't leave the temple area. Do not leave your life of service. Do not give up on life. Give up on your dream so that God might use your dream and you could start living it. If you've got a decision to make, I'm going to be down here. We could talk about that decision. I'm going to invite you to stand so we might reflect about what God might be doing in our lives.
God rest ye merry gentlemen. 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 God rest ye sky a star to follow, and the sky a star to follow. God rest ye sky a star to follow, and the sky a star to follow. God rest ye sky a star to follow, and the sky a star to follow.